From demo to disc, this is Anatomy of a Song. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Anatomy of a Song, where we explore a song's journey from inspiration to composition to recording to release. I'm your host, Greg Smith. Today we visit with Ali Sharif. Ali is all things music. He spent several years in music marketing and distribution, most recently at TuneCore. We met during the formation of my charity, Inside Voices United. That's where we go into prisons and record original songs from inmates. And by the way, I have another podcast under my name and Inside Voices United, where I do talk with the inmates about their songwriting process. Check it out if you get a chance. But back to today's conversation. In addition to his music industry accomplishments, Ali is also a remarkable musician who writes and composes and records in his studio in Savannah, Georgia. In this first part of our conversation, we'll talk about his musical origins, inspirations, and his songwriting process. Good morning, Ali, and welcome to Anatomy of a Song.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely.
I've been talking about this for a while.
Yes, indeed. Well, good things come to those who wait, I suppose. So let's make some good things happen this morning. So tell me, let's do some bio stuff just real quick. Tell me where you're from.
I was born in Newark, New Jersey, 1960, and it was very interesting city that I lived in. At some point, though, my parents split, and my mom took us to California. We lived in Compton first, and then we lived in Inglewood after that. So I was back and forth between Newark and LA all my childhood.
Interesting. And tell me about the house that you grew up in, the homes that you grew up in. Was there music in the homes that you grew up in?
There was always music in the homes. My dad was a big jazz guy. He introduced me to Miles and Dizzy, and he loved Carmen McRae.
Wow.
And that became one of my favorites. She's got this song called Pardon Me, Haven't We Met? And her version of it is my favorite version of it. And I listen to that thing endlessly.
That's awesome. You still listen to it?
I still listen to it. I was listening to it the other day. My dad has passed years ago. So whenever I think of him and I'm sitting next to Spotify or something, I'll play it and just, quick remembrance of him. But my mom, she was full on Motown. I mean, just full on Motown. That whole era, Stylistics, Temptations, Four Tops, Smokey Robinson. I mean, all of that stuff. That was in our house. I remember she had a lot of album covers at one point, and I thumbed through them, and there was this beautiful album cover of Diana Ross. And it was such a striking cover. It's like a black and white cover of her. So striking that I was so drawn to that cover that I wound up listening to that album over and over and over just from the cover art, which is a part of what we don't get a chance to really kind of obsess over anymore since everything is so digital.
Interesting. And did you have any do you have any siblings?
I do. I have three brothers, and I had two sisters. One of my sisters just passed just recently.
Sorry.
And she was the youngest. She was the baby. But yeah, we
were they musical?
They were not. I was a very different kid in the family. My mother put me in guitar lessons early on because I had an interest for music. I was the kid in the neighborhood after the Jackson 5 came out, and for a young black kid who was interested in music, that was like the pinnacle of what you could be, So I was a kid in the neighborhood who always pulled everybody together, and we had these little singing groups, and we practiced our steps, and I'd write songs and let my grandmother listen to them. I remember the first song I ever wrote was a song called Siberian Wolf Call. It was about a wolf in the tundra who was on his own and hungry. And I don't know what inspired me to write this thing, but my grandmother, she was just so encouraging. Oh, baby, that is so beautiful.
Siberian Wolf Call. Look for it in your Spotify playlist. I think you should revisit Siberian
Yeah,
Wolf Call. Do you still remember it?
exactly. I do. I
Interesting.
do. Let's see. It's Siberian wolf call. Woo, woo, woo. I found you in your cup in the South Pole, freezing. Your head was hurting, your paws were bleeding. What else could you possibly be needing? Siberian wolf call.
That is awesome. It will be a serious mistake if you don't do something with that. I'm encouraging you. I think the next album, I think that's the title track right there. You can travel to Siberia and do the cover art. So you wrote that at what age?
I was I had to be around 6 or 7.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what, so this is an interesting thing, and it's one of the reasons that I do this podcast, is to talk about the songwriting process and to talk about where inspiration comes from and how people write songs. And, you know, most people don't attempt it. I certainly didn't attempt it until I was old. I think the first song I ever wrote was on my 18th birthday. And I had played on a lot of songs. I played
Mm.
since I was a kid, but I didn't write anything until I remember the song that I wrote, and I later recorded it. But I wrote it on my 18th birthday, but I didn't write before that. I didn't consider it something that, you know, I wanted to do or needed to do. And then the songs just kind of poured out of me after in the years that followed. So at a very early age, you're thinking about writing songs, not just, you know, singing, imitating Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5 dance steps. You're actually out there writing Siberian Wolf Call. What, what prompted you to write music?
Uh, Lyrics, words, and what they said to me. I mean, there was, like I said, there was always music in the house from an early age. And as much as I was into the groove and the beat, I was really laser focused on what people were saying. Um, and my grandmother would, in the kitchen, she would sit and she would talk to me for hours. I'd watch her cook, and as soon as I could reach the stove by standing on this little stool she had in the kitchen, you know, she would have me up there learning how to cook grits and oatmeal or whatever it was,
Yeah.
and she'd just tell stories, and I would ask her questions, and I was fixated on these stories and just kind of mesmerized by them, and you know, and I thought, what an amazing thing to sit and listen to a story. So I wanted to tell my own stories.
Interesting. Okay, so there are a lot of good songs out there, but to you, I'm shifting gears here a little bit. What makes a good song? And we're going to talk.
Uh,
I do want to preface that by saying we're going to talk about your specific music and a specific song that you have going on. We're going to talk about "Down, Down, Down," which is a song that you've been working on. But just in general, if we can kind of step back from the process, as someone who's written quite a few songs and been in studios for many years, tell me what you think makes a good song.
a song that paints a picture. I mean, so well, let me back up. There are two things, right? There's the musicality of it, right? There's a structure of it. There is harmony. There's melody. I love an amazing voice. I mean, you know, I get really attracted to beautiful voices and people who use their voices like instruments. So that's one part of it. But the other part of it for me, um, in terms of why I wanted to write my own music, is that I love storytelling and I love closing my eyes and seeing a picture, right? I
Mhm.
love the kind of cinematic aspect of lyrics and what they can do to your imagination. Very much the same way I read a book. You know, you read a book and those characters become your own.
Mhm.
You imbue them with whatever attributes make sense to you. They look a certain way, they move a certain way, and I think really good songs do the same thing. They let you dream and they let you see parts of the world and parts of the universe that you could only imagine or have never imagined. And I love that about music.
So tell me a little bit about your process of songwriting. What comes first, words or music? We'll start there.
It depends. I started off when I was writing, trying to write popular music, and then I moved on to kind of R&B because, young black kid in my 30s. I had this studio in in Brooklyn, and I had a lot of hip hop and R&B cats come in. But for me, uh, I used to start with chords, right? I'd sit there and I'd play chords, and then melody would come to my mind, and then a lot of times I would write and I would hum a melody, and then lyrics would come. And then sometimes, I would write poetry a lot, and so I had pages and pages of poetry. So once I got a chord progression, I would go to my box of well, I don't know if they're lyrics, but poems, and then I would make lyrics out of them. Today is very different. At some point in my late teens, early 20s, I became a house music head. And while I was producing for other people and running the studio, house music was something I would go dance to, but nothing I really wanted to write. Um, but at some point, I was like, I love this music so much. It speaks to me so much on a spiritual level that I'm going to start doing that work and start working with people who really do house and really kind of understand its structure and what makes me move about it. And so a lot of times now when I'm working, I'll start from just the drums and I'll work on a groove until I get the groove tight and it moves me the way I want to be moved. And then sometimes I'll write lyrics to it, and sometimes I won't. Sometimes I'll just play and it'll be an instrumental. Um, yeah, but so it differs. Sometimes I'll be sitting somewhere and a phrase will come to my mind, and I'll say, oh shoot, I need to go, and I'll go through my list of grooves that I've already created, and I'll say, this works really well with that, and that becomes a song.
So speaking about that process, where do you write music? Some people have like special places that they have. I talked to one musician who said, "Oh, I've got a sunroom on the back of my house, and I get my cup of tea or cup of coffee or a beer if it's late in the afternoon, and sit there, and that's the place that I write. And I've got this chair that I sit in." Do you have a specific place that you write, or does music come to you in different places?
I do not have a specific place. I write at the kitchen table. I write on the way to pick up my daughter from school. I write uh, anywhere. Because lately, and really, once I got an opportunity to really start working on music in studios, I was bitten by the studio bug, and I looked at myself as more producer than a writer, right? And then what I learned and what I know about playing is really for me about getting a song to a place where I could produce it. So the magic for me happens in the studio while I'm producing, but I can write anywhere.
There's an old saying that a song tells you what it wants as you go through the process. The song kind of reveals itself, is another way to put it. Have you found that to be the case when you're writing?
I've learned that.
Okay.
I've learned that. There's a time when I tried to force it and push it, and it never came out right, and I would spend days working on something, just really trying to force it. And then I realized that once I step away and come back to it days later and listen to it, it tells me what it wants, and then everything flows. There's no more struggle. I'm not pushing anymore. I'm not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Everything just seems to flow, and that's just, I guess, my brain um, loosening up and saying, "Listen to the universe, and don't try to tell the universe what to do. Let it tell you what to do."
Yeah.
And it's such an easier process when I do that. My workflow is faster. I feel inspired, and I mean, this. It's that if you're not inspired, you can sit there and you can try to work something to death, and then you wind up with analysis paralysis. Did I do the right thing? Did I do that? But when it just comes organically, and you step away, you're like, oh, that's it. I got it. I got it. Makes sense to me.
Songwriters sometimes, and I've actually heard people like, Chris Martin and Peter Gabriel and accomplished songwriters talk about there being a moment for a song, a time for it to be put out into the world. Have you found that to be true for you?
Uh, you know what? I don't know. So I'm 64, and when I worked, when I was doing a lot of work on music, I owned a studio at this house in Brooklyn, and on the bottom level of the house, I built a studio.
Yeah.
And but those were in the days before independent musicians could distribute, and so there were the gatekeepers, right?
Yeah.
And so I spent a lot of time thinking that things were ready to be put out, and then you pitch them to the labels, and they don't bite. They don't bite. They don't bite. So I got rid of that bug about it's time to be put out. For me now, it's a matter of it's time to be finished, right? Whether it gets put out or not. For me, the process of having a vision, completing that vision, and saying done has become a lot more important to me. And so now I've got a lot of work that where I kind of struggled and then relaxed a little bit, and things are done now. So now I'm starting to put music out because it's easy to do it. I'm not worried about whether or not somebody will accept it or release it on their label. It's done. I can do it myself, and now I can put it out. So now I'm in a place where, yeah, it's time to put it out. But before it was just about it's time to be done, right? Time
Yeah.
to let it go, and say well done. And if I didn't do exactly what I wanted to do, well, there's an opportunity to do it on the next one.
Yeah. And I've talked with a number of musicians, and I came up with and it's as they say, it's an old saying that I made up, which is the 95% rule in my studio, which is that I can sit there and I can do a guitar solo to death, you know. And when I was younger, I would do 20, 30 takes until I would get it exactly right because I thought you have to strive for perfection. And as I went through the process, and this is leading to a question, but as I went through the process, I realized that it was more important to let something go and to finish it because the destination was different. In other words, if I was, and you touched on it just a moment ago, if I'm in a studio for, Columbia Records and I'm doing a big album release, well, then, it's got to be the 100% rule, right? But
Right.
when you are a musician who is not burning up the charts, but doing, a painter paints and a sculptor sculpts and a musician writes and composes and records. So you do what your gift gives you. But the end destination for me and for a lot of musicians is let's get it out there. Let's just get it out on Spotify or Amazon Music or wherever. And so that's when I come up with the 95% rule. And it sounds like you're echoing that as well. So the question to you is, when did you sort of come to that realization, and what brought you to that realization that, it's good enough. Let's get it out in the world.
Once I became comfortable uh, in my own voice. And that's, I've talked to a lot of musicians, a lot of my friends are musicians. And the thing that, we've all struggled with at some point is it good enough in comparison to this? And so you spend a lot of time with influences in your head, musicians who you really appreciate and really respect, and those become influences for how you write or how you produce. And and um, and because they attain such status, it's hard sometimes to believe that what is in your head, though it's different than what you hear, is valid. And so it took me a while to get to a place where, particularly on the production side, where my voice is valid to me, right? It is, everybody's not going to dig it. Some people will, some people won't. But the goal is not to have everybody dig it. The goal is to have my truth represented in the music. And And so once I got to that point, it's like, oh, okay, let me just do what I do and finish it and put it out. So, that's what I started doing. And it's freeing, man. It's it's a very liberating thing to not be guided and held back in your own mind by voices that tell you that that your voice may or may not be more or less valuable than anybody else's. Now that's been hard for me. That's
Hmm.
something that I struggled for a long time.
And that's our episode for today. You can pick up on the conversation with Ali in part 2 of our conversation. And that's our episode for today. Anatomy of a Song was written and produced at The Sawmill in Blairsville, Georgia. As always, feel free to contact me with your questions and or thoughts on your own composing and recording process. Our email address is, it's one long word, anatomyofasongpodcast@gmail.com. I'm your host, Greg Smith. We'll see you next time on Anatomy of a Song.